So earlier this year, there was an officially hosted RPG Maker Game Jam, with the objective being beyond expectations. In 30 days, you have to make a game. From scratch, obviously, and that's kind of the way these game jams go. Sometimes it's like a few days, sometimes it's 30 days, whatever. The event ran from March 20th to April 21st, so I figured I would be part of this. However, there's one slight hitch in this. I did not know about this game jam until just a few days before the deadline. 4 days, specifically. So the only way I was going to be able to make a game in any capacity was to have no sleep and just demolish my way through any sort of obstacle that stood in the path of victory, I guess. A huge incentive for this game jam was the fact that there would be a $1,000 prize for first and second place winners. Third and below didn't get anything, except like consolation prize, like a free music DLC, but my objective was, can I get this $1,000 with 4 days of work? So I had to assemble the people, my friends, and the people who could actually do other stuff apart from me, since, you know, I might know RPG Maker very well, sure. I've been using it for like, what, 13 years now, I think? But I sure as hell can't draw that well. So that was the objective. 4 days to make a game. $1,000 on the line, and, well, let's see how it went. This is the journey. We'll go day by day and explore how exactly I made my game in 4 days, and what exactly the game was, how it fit to the theme, what exactly I was putting into it, and of course, before we get to that specifically, have a little bit of prelude on exactly how this idea came to pass, like what exactly led up to the creation of this specific idea. So, enjoy a prelude before we get into the actual meat of the game jam itself. Just want to quickly jump in here before the prelude to say, Wishlist homepage in the description right now. It is an observation duty-like, if you like those kind of games, you know, anomaly finders. Except instead of watching cameras and doing that kind of stuff like that, you're looking at websites. Think of a mix between Welcome to the Game and also observation duty. If that's something you'd like, check it down in the description. We need all the help we can get. Every indie developer knows that they need help getting Wishlist because that's a huge factor for getting any kind of push towards a game. So please consider wishlisting. Back to the video. So the very first step to the game jam was trying to choose what game to actually make for it. Only 4 days gave me a very limited time window to make anything kind of super complex. And as I've kind of discussed previously on this channel, I'm not a fast game developer. I don't make things super duper fast. It's not usually my forte. I'm kind of slow. So what exactly kind of game could you possibly make in 4 days? Well, I mean, something I'm very familiar with is Mascot horror. I do enjoy those a lot. And Five Nights at Freddy's style gameplay is something that's possible in RPG Maker. I've done it several times. All the way back in 2015, I made several RPG Maker Five Nights at Freddy's games. And we're talking first person, in an office, looking at cameras and that kind of stuff. And this little series was like a parody thing called Standbys. You got Standbys 1 and 2 and 3. And they're all basically silly games that, you know, look ridiculous and goofy. But, I mean, they are Five Nights at Freddy's games. And then skipping ahead to 2017, I had an older game called Endurance, which, while not, you know, horror in any way, still had that base idea of sitting in a room, turning around and doing objectives, playing a game on your computer at the same time, which is ultimately what the base of the game for the game jam would end up being. Then skip ahead to 2022, where I made a game called Project Lockchair, which was actually the original design for this game that was going to end up becoming the one for the game jam. The same kind of thing like arises. You were supposed to basically like play a little game on your computer screen, though that part of the game was never actually implemented, and in your room would essentially have like mechanics you'd have to partake and look at and fix and make sure stuff is being managed correctly, or jump scare occurs, as you'd expect. Then a year later in 2023, we had the Grimace Shake game, where I made a fucking Grimace Shake game where the concept was still kind of the same. Instead of sitting in one place, however, you were expected to move to different locations and kind of solve the little miniature game on your Game Boy, but the base concept was still there. The evolution of the concept was still being made. You've got a area, Five Nights at Freddy's style-esque gameplay, where you're playing a little miniature game. The game was being slowly created over the course of time. Then Back just last year in 2024, for the 10-year anniversary of Five Nights at Freddy's, and I know I have mentioned it several times in this channel about having a FNAF remake video where I show me remaking FNAF in RPG Maker, but for people who are worrying about that, I tried like 3 separate occasions to make that FNAF RPG Maker video. The game itself was made in a few days. It wasn't a complicated thing. I made it over a couple of weeks, just a little bit here and there, and it was so boring to try and explain, here's exactly how I made the game. Let me go into detail about how I essentially did stuff I've done forever and a half all the time, and it was so boring. I couldn't bring myself to make it interesting. I tried my best, but I really couldn't. So I decided better to just kind of include it in this video because, well, it's kind of the same genre. It's still a FNAF-esque game. So I'll go a little bit into detail here in terms of the actual RPG Maker FNAF style. Most of the stuff I do in RPG Maker is done by just pictures. The show picture command holds a lot of weight for the stuff I do. Everything you're seeing on the screen is just pictures. In the editor, there's nothing there. It's just the events. I don't use plugins of any kind. I just use inbuilt stuff. All the stuff you can do from opening RPG Maker out the box, that's what I use. The plugin menu doesn't get used. That's the main thing. Everything outside of that, sure, but like the plugin menu never gets touched. And the thing is, there are many very simple commands you can use to have things be clickable. It doesn't have to be a clickable button, but you can define where on the screen certain variables used to click buttons. Yeah, sure, it's a bit archaic and manual and shit like that, but like it's still what I do. And I'm sure there's 1,000 better ways. I mean, in recent times, I've come to know a lot more intricate commands, especially with script calls and kind of stuff like that I could make to make things way easier for myself. But maybe I'm just a bit of a prideful ass in that way where I try to be like, yeah, no plugins, that's my claim to fame, because, you know, I could use plugins and maybe make something even better. But I have this weird thing where I'm like, if I don't know the code inside and out, I don't really know how to kind of finagle it to do what I need it to do. And, well, I don't really know how to code that well. I know RPG Maker, but I probably couldn't switch over to something like Unity or Godot or Godot, however you pronounce it, just on the base that I can't really read and write code that well. I can read better than I can write, but I can't do it that well. So from that RPG Maker, you know, in FNAF thing, I was able to use all the skills I had before to try and like essentially make the best possible version of this game concept. FNAF, but you play a little miniature game instead of looking at cameras. That is the base of what we're looking at here today. The game is called DECCI. Now, for DECCI, it was supposed to be like a Mascot horror game where you have this strange creature, a 2D sprite that essentially comes to life in the 3D world. Some characters should always stay 2D. It's kind of the tagline of the entire game. Also, in case you're wondering, it's called DECCI because decapod, like a crab, because the character is supposed to be a crab. So how exactly did I find out about the game jam itself and like actually get into doing it? Like, why did I find out 4 days beforehand rather than like knowing the full 30 days in advance? Well, it's because I myself did not find out about it like via like an online source. My brother happened to see a comment in a live stream he was watching mentioning someone putting the finishing touches on their RPG Maker Game Jam game. Looked it up and then told me, and I immediately went into blind panic, being like, the theme is beyond expectations? That's what I do! That's my thing! It felt like I had just lost the biggest opportunity of my life. Seeing $1,000 as the prize, like, listen, I know I talked a couple of videos ago about how, like, you know, I quit my job in order to pursue the game development stuff like that, but let me tell you, you know, I was running out of money. The money would be good, right? Like, I obviously knew I had money still, but like, I was still struggling with the amount of money I had, but $1,000 would do a great deal to at least help with that. So after about an hour of kind of flapping back and forth, running around being like, oh no, what do we do? Do we actually join the game jam? What could I possibly make in that time? The decision was made. DECCI. DECCI is small enough that you could make it, but it is beyond expectations. At a base level, it's like, what do you think when you think RPG Maker? You don't think a FNAF style first-person game where you play a 2D platformer. That was what I was going to do, and I had 4 days to do it. Specifically, I had just over like 100 hours to do it. So now we're gonna go day by day discussing what happened in each day, the problems that occurred, and the features put into the game, and how exactly that led up to the release of DECCI. At least a demo form of it, I guess. So we begin with day 0, the day I actually found out about the game jam itself, where 104 hours were left on the clock. So you might be wondering why I call this day 0. And the reason why is because this was not a full day by any means. I only had a few hours really to work on this specific day because it was late at night when I found out about the game jam itself. But I knew if I wanted to finish in time, I needed to at least get the very, very basic level of stuff done. Due to my extended experience in stuff like making FNAF-style games and also making 2D-esque platformers in RPG Maker, I was able to put it all together very quickly, at least the very, very basic stuff. I took the assets from a game I never finished called Not My Final Form, and essentially used them in order to create like the basic level of, 2D platformer stuff. Luckily, when it comes to coding platform, interact with player, and player jump, that stuff was very easy for me to do. It mainly just comes down to, again, picture display. The picture can move left and right, and when you press jump, it adds a certain amount of pixels to the jump. It added like a jump variable that kind of decrease over the course of time. When it comes to collision in general, I have kind of like a system for this. I have like kind of a internal idea of how to do collision, and I'm sure it is coding nonsense. Like, I'm sure there's a way better way to do this, but it's the way I do it. It's all manual variables to determine that stuff. So it didn't take me very long to have a very base level of just very look basic 3D models, get some very basic stuff made in Blender, have a picture that I could display, have a, interface, and have a character move. It was sluggish, it was slow, but at a base level, it worked. And the only thing else I wanted to get done this day was just make it so that I could turn the camera. And again, because I could define where the mouse variable is, and make it so that when I go to the left and right side of the screen, I can have an animation play, where one picture is displayed after another to create the turning animation. So by the time I got to the end of day 0, only after just a few hours of work, I essentially had a very, very basic looking room that I could turn around in, and I guess a barely functional platformer with jumping and walking was about all I could do in it. There was no other functions or anything. No health, no death, no features, no enemies, nothing. All of that would have to actually be done later. But since, of course, it was already late, and I think it was like 6 a.m. when I was like, alright, I gotta sleep. This basic part is done. Let's just go to bed. So thus ended day 0. And then from here, things, of course, got a lot more interesting. Day 1 fully began, and I was able to assemble the people who were able to help me make the game, like graphics. While I would ultimately have to handle all the 3D stuff, despite my kind of lack of experience in the field to begin with, the 2D graphics in large we handled by 2 different people. And each of them did a fantastic job on all the graphics by the end, but one would handle any 2D texturing stuff, and one would handle any 2D sprite work and animations. And these 2 were a lifesaver, because if I had to do all this stuff myself, this game wouldn't have been finished. There's no way it would have been finished in any capacity. I was barely able to handle doing the 3D stuff. But when it came to the stuff that I could actually do, mostly the programming, day 1 was very productive. Of course, every day had to be productive, but in order to achieve that, I had to have the separate levels, I had to have the enemies, and I had to have actual proper collision and full movement implemented into the game. I wanted to ensure that the game itself would be kept very simplistic in the sense that the objective of the little miniature game on the screen, would be jump on enemies, gain points, and that's how you do it. The game would have 5 separate levels, which essentially just was score bars, where you have to get some amount of score in order to succeed. And this in its entirety was just very simple to put in, because most of it was just counting, how many points you get. When you jump on an enemy, you would get points. In the end, there was only actually 3 enemy types and only 4 interactable objects in the game. We had little starfishes, which just kind of go back and forth on the ground, your first enemy to encounter. Very simple and very easy, nothing too special about them. The second enemies would be introduced being little birds that just kind of go from one side of the screen to another and then go again and again just in a loop. These, of course, being off the ground kind of give it more dynamicness since they could also be across gaps. Since at this point the platforms had been put in properly to the actual positions I wanted them to be. Now, these did change slightly over the course of the development, but for the most part, I'd actually put the platforms where they should actually be for the 5 levels. The third enemy was a little bit more tricky. Though it didn't move, it was supposed to be like a jellyfish that would occasionally have like a sting animation. This took a little bit of time to do, but it did actually end up being very cool. It's very unique and different from the other 2 enemies. And the last interactable object was just a treasure chest. This was just so you could have bonus points essentially come up every now and again, so that it didn't feel like you were kind of of lagging behind on points. But at a base level, despite the way it all kind of was coming together, it was actually more fun than I thought it was gonna be to kind of mess around with the game. Mainly just because being able to bounce on an enemy and having the screen be as small as it is meant that like you could bounce from enemy to enemy to enemy, and it'd be very satisfying to kind of do that. But it wasn't fully there yet. There was definitely something missing, but I didn't really know what it was. And given the tight time frame, I did not have a moment to think about what to do. And over the course of the day, many of the graphics themselves we put into the game, like the digital graphics anyway, for the actual little miniature game. The speed that I had others working like was insane. I couldn't believe how fast they were pumping stuff out. I was like, my god, I know we're making this game very fast, but these are coming real quickly. And at the same time, the other artist was also doing the graphics, while the fact that the room still looked like, you know, as it does. Outside of the little miniature game, obviously, there was additional factors like the left side of the room and the right side of the room had to also be implemented fully. The left side of the room was put in by the end of day 1, but it only had placeholder graphics right now. I didn't have time to have any sort of like actual 3D model of DECCI made at this point. That was like the next objective of tomorrow. Like I was just like, I'll worry about that tomorrow. So at the moment, it was just essentially the idea that if you look at the left-hand side, what you have to do is keep looking. And the more you look, the more DECCI backs away. Right now, it was represented by just a number. Of course, in the full game, I wanted him to get like closer and closer and closer, but you know, this is the best I could do. I was like, well, if I don't have a model, I'll just put a number. I don't have time to think about like a fancy placeholder. Just put number. Bigger number equal bad. More you look at him, number go down. But it worked out just fine for what I was trying to accomplish for just a placeholder. Though there wasn't a way to actually die yet, since even if you died in the miniature game, nothing actually happened, and of course if DECCI reached you in the room, nothing would happen. But with the game kind of coming more together, since more of the graphics were being done, and the way that the room, you know, was kind of functioning was coming together, things were looking on the up and up. Yeah, sure, we were only like a few days away. I guess we were always just a few days away from the deadline, but at least the game felt possible. There was still a hell of a lot left to do. It wasn't like we were anywhere near the finish line at this point, but that did pretty much conclude what ended with day 1. The right-hand side wasn't done at all. You could look at it, but there was nothing to do with it. The left-hand side functioned, but obviously didn't look anything impressive. And the miniature game played, and it did play okay, but there was still plenty of collision issues and some lagginess because there was a couple of things I was doing that I realized were out of place, but over the course of the day it became smoother. But at a certain point I had to sleep because I'm pretty sure I was going for a straight 19 hours with like a half an hour in between to eat food, and that was it. So at a certain point I called it, and that day came to an end. Arriving to day 2 with honestly much less sleep than I probably should have gotten, but knowing that I did not have time to sleep, I began with the very important factor of just making the 3D models. Since no one else was going to be able to do it, I had to take that myself. Now, obviously I don't exactly have much experience in making complex 3D models, but having anything super complex wasn't actually needed. I just needed a room that had some, you know, stuff in it, and of course, the most complicated part, DECCI. I had no idea how I was going to do DECCI because, well, realistically speaking, I'm no, like, character designer. I knew what DECCI was supposed to look like. Luckily, I had concept art from a couple of years ago on what DECCI was supposed to look like, so I could at least base it on that. And over what must have been, like, an hour and a half, I proceeded to make this model. Just an hour and a half, and that amazes me. But here's the thing. I didn't have time to make a full 3D model. I did not have time to make legs and a body and, like, proper rigging or any rigging. All I ended up doing was creating the head, which has the iconic grinning smile and the whited out eyes, and one arm and hand, or I guess claw, since it's just a point. Since it was supposed to have that kind of idea of like early era 3D models where they look kind of janky and wobbly, I didn't have to worry too much about how good it looked on a technical level. So, although I only had an arm and a head, I realized that's all I need. As long as the jump scare that DECCI does only features just those things, then I don't have to worry about anything else. Especially because the whole him in the doorway thing was about it being dark and the, you know, kind of fades in and fades out. I only needed the head for that. So I got very creative in what exactly I could do. I took what I had and essentially positioned DECCI's head in multiple different positions, getting closer and closer to the camera in order to create the graphics for the left-hand door. This worked out excellently for its purposes, and since the full 3D room didn't take that long to make, because all I had to really do was touch up some of the placeholder graphics I had made on the first, or the Zeroth day, and just kind of give it some better quote-unquote texturing work, it looked fine for what it needed to do. And of course, as the graphics for the room started coming in, fully, we then had stuff to kind of fill in. We had clouds, and a sunshine, and some vines, and a tree, and even some little drawings that looked like children's scribbles that could really fill out the room to make it look a little bit more alive. Which, good. That was the objective. As long as it looked like it was a room that stuff happened in, and the room functioned, that's all I needed. And when it came to the jump scare, again, got very clever. Because of camera trickery, all you had to see was just his arm and his head. And it worked. I love the jump scare. Of course, when you look at it from not camera view, it looks ridiculous because it's just a floating head and an arm going rrrr. I mean, hey, it works, right? It works. It works perfectly. And this was only the start of the day. I don't know what possessed me to make me go so much faster during this day, but I got the entire right side implemented as well. This involved having switches pulled down and free buttons to be pressed. These interacted with the miniature game directly. You had to keep the power button held down in order to power the game. The longer you didn't, the darker the screen would get, and if you didn't power it at all, eventually you would die from power outage. As for the free buttons, occasionally on the miniature game, the screen would begin to flash a certain color, and you'd have to turn in order to press the right button, but if you press the wrong button, you also die. And also throughout the day, the rest of the sprite graphics would be completely finished, finishing off all the stuff. It was fast, and I mean, this was basically all the artwork I needed for the game, done. And I was like, well, I mean, we're actually pretty far along here. And another huge factor that basically went into this day was the sound effects. Now, for something that I personally will always advocate for, is that if you are a game developer, like an indie dev who only work on your own or a very, very small team, get creative with sound effects. You can make a lot of your own sound effects very easily. Use little objects in your house, use different combinations of objects to make different sounds. Use editing, Audacity and stuff like that. You can get very creative and it can create a wide range of sound effects if you can't find something online. I, for a long time, found finding the right sound effect and putting it into the game being really boring. A really terrible part of game development I did not enjoy. But once the moment it came to being able to make my own sound effects and realizing, oh yeah, I can just do this myself, I changed up completely. And it's great knowing that the sound effects in the games I make are just wholly original. You're not going to hear them in 80 other games because, it's a stock sound effect. But of course, there's nothing wrong with using stock sound effects. I'm sure if I find a good one, I will definitely still want to use it. I'm not exactly against the idea of using it all. But there were still some huge chunks of the game still missing. We didn't have a game over screen yet, certainly, and we didn't have a menu of any kind to actually get into the game. No options or anything like that. The game was still just play, and I needed to, of course, bring it all together. But I feel like the entirety of day 2 being way more productive, things were coming together. Things were slotting into place. The actual room itself started to look like what it should do with the graphics. And though the turning was still kind of laggy, which I would only discover the next day why that was, due to some inefficiency in my code I had accidentally put in by complete mistake. It was still coming together. We still had a good number of hours left, but again, at very late in the morning, I needed to decide I need to sleep or else I will pass out. So, with the game coming together very nicely, the 3D stuff done, and a lot of the 2D graphics done, day 2 came to an end. So day 3 arrives. Tomorrow will be the deadline, and I have about 40 hours left before that deadline hits when I begin working on this day. So at this point, it was, I have to finish everything today and get it tested so that tomorrow it's not just terrible. So the first thing I fixed up today was, of course, fixing any of the issues with smoothing gameplay out, making sure that the turning didn't lag. When I was very tired the previous night, I was like, why is it lagging? I can't figure this out. The moment I went to bed, woke up, I was like, now that I have actual brain power, I'm able to think, and it fixed it very easily. I fixed some collision issues with the enemies to make it easier. I actually made jumping on the enemies easier. I added the loading screen so it could actually transition to gameplay. I even added little tiny cutscenes that would essentially just be text with a little 2D digital face of the 3D DECCI pretty much talking to you. These did not take long to make, obviously, and they were just kind of to pad out the content of the game. But not long into the day, I realized, okay, we are in a position where we have a lot of the game done. You know, I started putting more sound effects in, and at a certain point, the sound effects felt like they were mostly complete. But now, I need to get the menu done. Before I could get people testing it, I needed to get the game to a point where it's like, this could potentially be played by anyone. So, I made the menu. And for the menu, I have had this idea in my brain since I think back in 2022, when the original DECCI concept was made. I wanted to have the 2D cabinet with the fancy logo made by the third artist, and of course the fancy look of the character, also made by the third artist, on the side of the cabinet, while having the 3D DECCI kind of poking out behind it. And of course, because of the whole trickery with just the head and the arm, it looks great again. It came together so nicely. It looks like he has a whole model, but when you turn the camera around and look behind, you can see it's just a moving arm and a moving head. And I love making menus, so this wasn't hard for me to do at all. This did not take long to implement at all. This was very quick. For the options menu, I kept it very simple. I just had audio settings and of course a button to change if it was in full screen or not. Kept the credits very easy as well, just simple buttons, nothing much. Play game, options, that's pretty much it. That's all I really needed. And once that was all in and the rest of the graphics were put in, and, of course, the game over screen was now being put in, which, again, using the tricks, using some artwork, managed to make it look nice. And at this point, at about halfway through the day, I was like, okay, the game is at a point where I need to get people to test this. So I called upon everyone I could, every friend who was available at that time to help me test this game. Got on a Discord call and started playing it, like, the entire game, like 6 people playing it all at the same time, meanwhile me, like, as if it had turned in the most meta way into Final Fantasy Freddy's, with 6 different screens showing me DECCI, and me having to watch all of them to try and find any issues in any of them. Being like, oh, what can we do? What can we do? What can I change? What needs updating? Was there any bugs? Well, how did that happen? Well, you were moonwalking? Yeah, so it kind of turned into a bit of crazed, okay, what do I gotta do here? But it was very productive. It was extremely productive, because at a base level, a few things were discovered. One, too hard. The amount of points you need to get to each level was too high. While very possible, I was thinking from the perspective of, this is an RPG Maker game jam. Many people may not be familiar with FNAF as much, but I'm sure they'd be still familiar enough with gameplay of this type that they could definitely do it. So I lowered the score amounts, and that worked out great. It felt a lot more accessible, a lot more fun. But another huge feature, and the thing that really brought the gameplay together in its entirety, was adding a drop down. Originally, in order to get to a higher platform, you would have to just jump up. And of course, when you want to get to a lower platform, you'd have to walk across and then walk down like each platform. But adding the ability to press down to go through a platform made it so much better. The gameplay became way more fun and dynamic because you could instantly get from where you needed to go to get to a place in the screen. And it's amazing how such a tiny feature that I hadn't even considered as an idea that other people like testing the game would be like, hey, this needs to be put in. That changed everything. And that's why testing is so important, because you as a game developer do not know the best. Like, you can be pretty good, you can get stuff together, but you are not the one who knows everything. Now, of course, sometimes it can be a bit of an ego hurt when you're like, oh, but I wanted it to be, as good as possible. And you're like, you feel hurt because you're like, criticism and stuff like that. Like, sure, of course. Everyone feels that kind of sense where they're like, damn, I wish I had done it right the first time. Or like, I wish that like it wasn't bad when people play it. But that's why testing is important. You need people who will brutally tell you when something is bad. And luckily, I do have those people in my life. But over the course of several testing versions, a few things were discovered. In terms of a few bugs with collision, I made it a lot easier to hit the enemies rather than the enemies hitting you. I think a common thing in game, like theory and stuff like that, in game design, is to ensure that it's way easier for you to hurt the opponent than it is for the opponent to hurt you. At least in single player games. Of course, that's why oftentimes multiplayer games are so much more difficult, because you have to make it balanced for every player involved, and it can often feel like you get cheaped out because, well, they didn't hit me, that kind of thing. But of course, when it's just NPCs or enemies in the game, we say, yeah, okay, let the enemy be the one that's at the disadvantage. It's just better for an overall experience. So it's way easier to hit the enemies than it is for the enemies to actually, like, their hitboxes are much smaller than the hitbox that DECCI has to, like, stomp on them. And of course, there was a couple of changes in terms of moving some stuff around, and I made sure to make it as obvious as possible for how to play the game as I possibly could. I added in little notes on the walls that literally told you what to do, because I didn't want some like big text tutorial. I just wanted to be like, hey, look at the game, you can figure it out. It's a very simple game, and it will tell you what to do. And over the course of testing for the most of the day and kind of going back, making new versions, fixing some bugs, fixing collision, adding in a couple things, major fix on the loading screen, because originally when going from the game over screen back to the loading screen, it would kind of load the entire thing again rather than just being able to load instantly because the stuff was already there. That was a humongous fix, which would definitely have made the game much worse if it hadn't been put in. But it's another huge change that came because of testing. Because when you switch to a different screen in RPG Maker MZ, it likes to get rid of the entire cache. Now there are ways around it, but I didn't have time to think about like doing that. So instead, I put the game over screen into the game screen in order to make it so it all stayed in the same place to prevent that from happening. But of course, we got to a point where it felt like, hey, the game's basically done. It works, it functions, it's not buggy, and it works. The game works. And we were only on day 3. We still had day 4 to go. Of course, I wasn't quite done yet though. I still wanted to make sure the game was as good as possible because I still had time. So even though most of this video felt like, yes, the rampant feeling of gotta go, we were now at the point where it's like, man, what else can I add at this point? What can I do to make it better? And so even though, yes, it was still very, very late, I went to bed on day 3, feeling a bit more relaxed, thinking, this time I've got time. So, dawn of the final day. 16 hours remain until that deadline hits. What exactly was I gonna do? In a bit of a emergency panic, I was looking at the game in its entirety, and I was looking at the Game Jam's like criteria, and I was thinking to myself, does this actually go beyond expectations? Is this what they're looking for? Do they want like twists? So I wasn't really sure what to do. I didn't want to leave the game kind of being like just the game. I wanted to have some way to be like, hey, there's something more to this game, it's kind of cool. So I decided what my idea was to have it so the game would begin with just the most generic RPG Maker looking map I could fathom. I knew when it came to the judges playing the game at the very least, they would have to play for 15 minutes. So I knew if I made a very basic and about a 1 minute long RPG Maker screen, there's nothing on the screen, it uses the basic default assets, it even uses the basic default characters. And I made this so when you get to the end of it, it changes. It starts with the default text boxes, but then this happens. And from there, it would go into the actual game itself. I figured that would be kind of a cool opening twist that people would enjoy, to be like, hey, there's more to this than it seems. If I was to get any points in the theme, that's what I'd have to do. Because the way the breakdown of the scoring for the system goes for this game jam was that it was 100 points in total. Theming was 30 points, with all of our categories being 20 except the polish, which was 10. So I wanted to make sure I could at least get a couple of points. I wasn't feeling super confident in it actually doing super well because I was like, well, it's cool of a game, but there's not that much content to it. Are they going to care that much about it? So I added that extra bonus screen, and I think that was a really cool addition. I love it. But that aside, I still wanted to make sure the game itself was fully polished as possible. I went in and basically fixed any additional bugs that were found from testing that hadn't been quite fixed yet. I even decided to add little hint boxes at the very beginning of the game. I figured there was a small chance that the people playing it would not understand that they could look left and right with their mouse cursor, and there wasn't really anything to indicate that either. So I made sure that if you didn't move, like left or right, after a certain amount of time, it would come up with little bars on the side and tell you to look left and right. That way they could just be introduced to the concept at the very least. I also figured that with the little miniature game, that there was a chance that maybe it wouldn't be super obvious on how to do it if you didn't look at the how to play on the main menu. So I figured it'd be best to just have a little extra tip that comes with every level. So that each time you beat a level, you get one tip that relates to how the game's progressing. The first one just being like, jump on enemies to get points. And also tell the player of the drop down, that kind of stuff like that. Also tiny little additions like having the loading screen actually have a loading screen bar, which it's kind of funny when you think about, because even though there's no actual difference between how fast the game was loading, just being able to see a progress bar increase and be like, okay, cool, it's going, faster. Because one of the huge issues that I did not get to solve in time was that it took quite a bit of time to load the game the first time. Like, we're talking like 12 to 15 seconds, and it should not have taken that long. Now, granted, once you did that one time, you were in the game, and then boom, you were, doing it. But over the course of this day, as the hours started to tick down and we were getting closer to the deadline, time was running out, and I was doing testing again with people, but at a certain point, I was like, okay, the game is finished. It is as finished as it could possibly be. I have done as much polishing as possible. The artists have done all the work that they could possibly do. They've done touch-ups on their own artwork. Everything is as perfect as it could possibly be. And so, with 3 hours remaining, I uploaded the game to the Game Jam, with 1 additional hour being spent before that getting the game's page ready in order to put it actually up on itch.io, which is where the Game Jam was being hosted. So, with 104 hours at the very beginning to make the Game Jam, and 4 hours remaining on the clock, I got this game done with the help of awesome people. 3 different artists and like 6 different playtesters. We all came together and we did a fantastic job. So 100 hours to make a Mascot horror-esque game. And let me tell you, I want to make sure it's very clear that when I say I'm just talking about from the perspective of my first person, because I'm the one talking into the microphone right now. But this was a team. This was a team of people that did this. Sure, I did the programming, but they did the artwork. They did a lot of the artwork. It would be nothing without them. And the beta testers brought it together, making sure the game was actually fun and functioned. This is a we effort. We, Guess Morph Games, made this. I know Guess Morph Games for a long time has been considered maybe just like it's a solo developer type thing, and sure, some of the games are solo developed, and with maybe some additional help with some minute playtesting. Yeah, I've got artist friends. I've got people who can help me with testing, maybe some sound work, maybe some script writing, maybe some polishing and proofreading. These things are all teams. Sure, it's still an indie team. We're all doing it out of our spare time and doing the best we can, but this was a team effort. So I guess now at this point, you're probably wondering, how exactly did DECCI do, and what was the reception from the judges? Well, obviously, it wasn't exactly like day 4 or day 5 was when we got feedback on that. It was a good while later. So, with all that, the Game Jam's deadline closed. And so now we just had to wait. As time passed after the Game Jam finished, we were left with, questions of like, I wonder what people are going to think of it. And we didn't actually have to wait long for someone to actually play it on a stream. But this was awesome, because they loved it. Not in the sense that they really were a horror game player, but more in the sense that, it was very intriguing because of what it was in RPG Maker. It was very interesting and unique, and I was like, yippee! We did it! We actually did it! It came together and we were awesome! But of course, the judges were the factor we were worried about the most. Yes, of course it's awesome to get feedback from just anybody, and it was great to see it, but this was ultimately a game jam with cash prizes. And, I'm not gonna pretend like, I was just there for the fun of it. Like, yeah, sure, of course, but here's the thing, listen. At a base level, as I said, I've been using RPG Maker for 13 years. My hope was to win. I wanted the money. I wanted the money, and I wanted to prove that I could be the best. Yes, that's ego talking, but here's the thing. Why pretend you don't have some kind of want for something? There were some good games. I saw some really cool games and some really cool concepts that I thought were so cool, and I wanted them. If I wasn't gonna win, I wanted them to win. But I still wanted to win. Don't get me wrong. There was still that want, that fire. So I waited patiently, seeing what the judges would think. And although it took a long time for them to get around to it, obviously there's a lot of games, you know, that's 250, I think, something like that. There was, I think, 5 judges in total. So we waited patiently to see what they thought. And eventually, it started to come in. It was hard to gauge how exactly they thought about the games. We got some good feedback as things came in. Certain factors were very important that I hadn't considered given the tight time frame. One absolutely important thing that I had completely skipped over was colorblind support. With one of the factors of the game being that you have to press buttons when the screen flashes a certain color, there was no way to tell if you were colorblind, which is honestly ironic because one of the artists is colorblind. So I figured, okay, write that one down. Let's have symbols as well as the color. We also got feedback that maybe there needs to be a bit more in the room than just in the miniature game. You know, have a bit more like features, have some stuff going on in there. It is ultimately about 2 or 3 things you have to manage. Maybe a 4th could get added in later on. So that was made as a mental note as well. We could start thinking of stuff we could do for the future. But right now, obviously, it was a game jam. We didn't have a choice to update it. It was being judged on the way it was when the game was finished. That little opening segment where it has the fake default RPG Maker game actually seemed to go pretty well. People seemed to really like that. So I was very happy that that was implemented. But in terms of theme, this was the big factor. I did not expect that it'd be considered one of the best for the theme in the entire jam. I made an off comment in the game in one of the little cutscenes about how the game is made in RPG Maker MZ, kind of like that meta experience. Like DECCI speaks to the player saying it's made in RPG Maker MZ with no plugins at all. This apparently was one of the biggest factors for it getting points in the jam, because apparently it being made without plugins was such a huge shock to some of the judges that they were baffled on how I did the game at all. Which, you know, let's say a little bit of an ego boost there. It's like, yeah, these cool people in the community, I know how to do stuff they don't apparently. That's kind of cool. But like, I mean, obviously I've been using it in a non-conventional way for so long. It's bound to happen. But hey, can't say I'm not happy with that result. But of course, you know, time goes by. We're waiting on results. We're waiting to see how things turned out. And although we got some good feedback, we were still like essentially twiddling our thumbs thinking, did we get into round 2? Because the way the game jam was split up was that there was 2 rounds to the game jam. Round 1 was that when 2 judges would play your game. They would rate it, they would give it a score, and depending on that score, would move you into round 2. If you reached a certain threshold, I believe the top 50 score, you would go into round 2, in which the remaining judges would also play the game. We see that 1 judge plays the game, we see that 2 judges play the game, and then we wait a little bit, and we think, oh geez, was there any other judges? Then a 3rd judge played the game. But the funny factor was that one of the judges had said that this was part of a bonus collection, since one of the other judges couldn't apparently do all the games they needed to get done. So I figured, wait, so does this 3 judges count as them having played it for round 2? Or does this just mean that it's still part of round 1 and they haven't done it fully yet? I don't know. So we continued to wait. We waited, and then a 4th judge played the game, and a 5th judge played the game. And it was awesome. Seeing that the judges had clearly gotten us into round 2, we were very happy, but we still didn't know exactly where we placed. My best prediction when I was looking at all the Game Jam games and the kind of some of the reactions and kind of watching what the judges thought of other games, I was like, okay, I think there's a good possibility that maybe DECCI could get top 20. Because the way it was like looking and the way they kind of enjoyed certain games, I was like, well, they clearly aren't enjoying DECCI as much because one unfortunately huge factor was that basically none of the judges liked playing horror games and didn't want to keep playing DECCI because it was scaring them. I hadn't considered this factor even remotely. I obviously had thought like, well, maybe they're not that good at horror games or maybe not that familiar, but not wanting to play the game more because it was actually too scary or just because they didn't want to have to play like a FNAF-esque game because they were very unfamiliar with it at a base level, like having not even played or really even seen much FNAF. That was an unfortunate shock. But eventually the judges had played all the games. The voting had been done. We knew we were at least in round 2, so we could say we were top 50 at the very least. But how exactly did we place overall? First place gets $1,000. Second place gets $1,000. And DECCI got 3rd place. I was amazed, I will say. 3rd place is still a bronze medal. Like, no one can take away 3rd place from being a victory. And the team themselves was extremely happy with having gotten 3rd place. I would say that if we had the 30 days, we still wouldn't have won, actually. I don't think so. And the reason why, I actually think we would have done worse. The way my work ethic is and how slow I can sometimes be, and of course ADHD and all that kind of stuff. I probably would have procrastinated making the game over the course of those several weeks I would have had. Way more than I would have done where I worked 19-hour days, brought together the artists and everyone I could to test it, to make sure it was perfect. Because it wouldn't have been DECCI. I wouldn't have chosen DECCI for a game jam if I had 30 days to make it. Because I only had 4, I had to think of something very, very small. And together, we did excellently. We did the game jam. You know what's also funny? Because we didn't get a cash prize from the game jam, I ran out of money and had to get another part-time job. I couldn't fully dedicate myself to making games. But now, my job is extremely stable, and it's very easy for me to kind of do with my own personal skill set. And I've also got a good chunk of time during the week to just be able to make games. So I am now living a very nice and simple and peaceful life where I can just exist with a happy job that feels very nice, and I can also make games, and things are going well. My games are being put into other game festivals and kind of stuff like that. We're getting accepted into them, and things are on the up and up. I will remind you again, homepage does need your help. We need Wishlist for that. And if you like FNAF-esque style games or observation duty style games, that game will be right up your alley. It is just basically, I'm on observation duty. Instead of cameras, it is websites, which I think is a cool concept, and I wanted to explore it, and I've done so. So please, wishlist that game. I beg of you, it will help so much. But overall, what's next for DECCI then? What happens next? Do we do anything with DECCI? Do we just kind of let it sit and whatever? I mean, it's already been a few months since the game jam fully ended. Well, I guess that's when we discuss the future. Personally, I would love for DECCI to become a full game, to put it on Steam, kind of add some extra stuff, obviously make it a full, proper experience that's worth being paid for, and I think we're probably going to do that at some point. We at Guessmoth Games want to make DECCI a full game, but I don't know if it'll be right away. Obviously, we've already got 2 games that are coming out on Steam next year, so I don't know how, when DECCI will happen, but clearly, the formula works for what people like. A game like The Dead Seat taking off so soon after DECCI was made shows me that the concept works. That kind of style of gameplay, playing a little miniature game while also being in a FNAF-esque area, people like it. And people like getting more of what they like. Never be discouraged by the idea that someone else made your game. It can be a bit scary and you can wonder about it geez, did we go too slow? Did we make it too late? Don't worry about that stuff. People like more of what they like. That's how we get most popular games. We wouldn't get other Mascot horror games if Mascot horror wasn't a genre that was made by Five Nights at Freddy's. People like what they like. People like getting more of what they like. Just remember that fact. But in the immediate aftermath of the game jam, I did want to at least get DECCI up to a better position. So I added in some additional features to the game. I added in a way better loading screen. The fact that it took 12 to 15 seconds to load was ridiculous. And I found out why was because the loading screen was highly inefficient. I can get the game to load in 3 seconds now, which just feels so much better, and feels so much better when you're just playing it in general. I made the screen turning have a bit more of a bob to it, and actually be way quicker so it can feel a bit more smooth when you're kind of going for the game, rather than this slow turn, and it just feels better overall. And I even plan to add some additional features to the right hand side, as you can see by these mysterious switches. But what they do, well, I'll leave that up to the future. I don't want to spoil the surprise if we do bring DECCI back in a full fashion anyway. But as you can see also, I did add the colorblind support. I went back and did that, which I think is just a fun feature. I think it's important to have that kind of thing in a game. And there's also one tiny little minuscule change you probably have never even noticed while looking at the game. On this little picture here, where it shows only when screen flashes, when the Game Jam version has these 3 little lines next to the red button, while the full version, or at least the version I made after the Game Jam, doesn't. And you may think, well, why is that? Because one of the most misconceptions that seems to have arisen from that little tiny 3 lines was that when the screen flashes, you have to press red. So the people playing the game would see a green screen or a blue screen and still click red, being like, why did I die? Of course, we did add things to the game over screen, so when they die, it would say, you pressed the wrong button. They'd immediately get it after dying once. But the fact that they were dying once to that tiny little stipulation made me think, okay, so they think red button only, because that's where the 3 little lines are, rather than that being a representation for pushing in the button. So I changed that. That tiny little thing. And that's what I'm talking about when it comes to details in games. You gotta be really careful when it comes to the tiniest details in games. Sometimes you need a fresh perspective, like someone who does not know your game at all to play your game. When it came to testing, obviously, my friends were watching me develop it, you know, that they knew I was doing it. Some of them were the artists working on the game. So it's not like they could really ignore what the game was doing and the mechanics of the game. So something like that wouldn't really be on their radar. But overall, yeah, the new version of DECCI runs way better, is way smoother, and just loads a lot faster, with a couple of touch-ups and new features here and there. Now, this version is not public yet, and probably won't ever be, because the full version, when we get around to that, whenever we do, will probably be a lot better looking and have a lot more cool stuff going on. But overall, I'm very thankful I entered the Game Jam. We are very thankful I entered the Game Jam. Sure, we didn't get any cash prize, and that's always going to be like a little bit of a, oh, my ego stings. And hey, the first and second place winners, I feel like did deserve it. I don't really know much about the second place game because I never really looked too much into it, but from what I understand, its story and character seems to be its big shining point, and that's, you know, a huge factor. But the first place game, it just looks awesome. It looks like a really cool game, and hell yeah, you know, good job. It looks like a really solid, fun game to play, and that's all you need sometimes. All you need. If it goes beyond the expectation of being just like, hey, a really fun game, then that's fine. And so that's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed. I know this was a wacky experience going through the ups and downs of making a game for a game jam, I suppose, and how crazy stuff was and what had to be put in each day and all the weird tricks we had to use to do it. But overall, I think it was just a very fun experience. You know, it's kind of wild because it's almost like a fever dream, you know, because I make games sometimes over the course of months or even years, which I don't recommend. I think keeping games to like weeks or months maximum. Your game should be made, if you're an indie developer, in like 6 months max. Don't get too bogged down in the idea of making a really, really big game. But this game was 4 days. And I feel like I just like fever dreamed to the other side of it. 19-hour days with very little sleep in between and just kind of come out of it like, we're done. And it actually was a good game. That's the surprising part. It's a very functionally working game. That was wild to me. I never really used the whole it was made in 4 days as part of the factor of advertising when it came to the whole game jam and telling the judges, because I felt like that in itself was kind of unfair to the other contestants. It's not their fault that I found out about the game jam 4 days before the game, you know, jam ended. So I never really brought that up in any capacity. I put it in the store page, you know, or store page, itch.io page, just so we could be like, you know, hey, haha, fun. 4 days, my goodness, help. But I never put it in the game itself. I put the whole like no plugins thing because I thought that was super cool, and turned out, thank goodness I did. But overall, so yeah, hopefully DECCI comes to you in the future at some point. We'll let you know if that happens, and I guarantee you it probably definitely will. And also make sure to wishlist homepage. I'm gonna say that again because I want you to wishlist homepage. Please, it helps so much. Wishlist the game, it's in the description. And yeah, happy belated Halloween, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. I know horror is a fun factor for Halloween, so hope you enjoyed the video, and again, see you in probably like 6 months when the next video comes out, because these videos do not come out often at all. See you later!